substitute brain I plug in. It's coming. Anyhow, very, very inclement weather. Some of you still showed up. That's really good. I don't know how many showed up online. But we just keep going on with the Avatamsaka, the bright light in a murky world. Let's see. Okay, we're starting, believe it or not, a new section of verses. I can't say we're moving right along, but we are moving. All the glaciers are not gone. This class is a glacier, slowly crunching forward. Okay, so I got page 10 right at the top. 20万殊师利菩萨，万宝受菩萨言，佛者一切众生等有四大，无我，无我所。Okay, so the passage chapter continues with the Bodhisattvas asking for clarification through the Bodhisattva of Great Wisdom, Manjushri Bodhisattva, and he's addressing his questions to Jewel Leader Bodhisattva. As you read the Avatamsaka, you'll find a continuing pattern of back and forth between basically various speakers. Sometimes gods are speaking, sometimes lay people are speaking, sometimes different bodhisattvas are speaking. And you could get into a kind of a thing of, well, who's who and what's what and what's there. I think the better way to approach it is just to say all this is the Dharma being spoken. And it doesn't matter who the speaker is. All of them are transmitting the deep teaching, not only because they have acquired it through years of study, but moreover through practice and transformative understanding. And so everything they speak, everything they manifest is Miaofa, the wondrous Dharma. Obviously, Manjushri, being the Bodhisattva of Great Wisdom, is playing a role here. Need not ask these questions, knows the answers to all these questions. And Jewel Leader Bodhisattva is inferior or superior to Manjushri, it's irrelevant. In fact, you would guess that they don't get into those games anymore, who sits number one, who's number two, or anything like that. All that is gone, and especially as you see this passage coming up, the emptiness of identities, of names, of status, and so forth that's associated with the self. This is something that they don't think about being absent. It's just naturally not there anymore. It's worn away, so to speak. At that time, Manjushri Bodhisattva inquired of or asked Jewel Leader Bodhisattva, disciple of the Buddha, all sentient beings alike are composed of the four elements. They're devoid of a self or anything pertaining to a self. So this is the opening line, and that line is wu wo. If you see the Chinese without wo, self, wu wo suo, that which self belongs, or that which belongs to a self. I'll go into this a little bit because that's an important expression. You see this as a recurring theme, at least in this chapter 10. Remember earlier, I'm going back to one of the first sections of 10s. So there's a recurring theme here about what we call emptiness, sunyata, and also a recurring puzzle. So there's a combination of two things going on. The theme is the emptiness of dharmas, the emptiness of self, the inability to attach and cling to or get anything at all, and seemingly then the question that arises, a puzzle, why do the bodhisattvas engage in transformative teaching in the midst of that, and why would we? So this becomes the puzzle part, bouncing off the theme. The earlier one I'm referring to, you maybe find if you go back, it says the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the thinking mind. This is an earlier verse. The sensory organs all are empty and without a nature. But, and here's the key phrase in that verse, the false mind discerns them as existence. Anybody found that passage in the earlier verses? Back 1 or back 2, I don't know. What page is that? 6? On page 6 of your text. So here's what I'm saying is a recurring theme. But it goes into here, kind of carrying over from this one, where it says the 4 elements. So if you say the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body, these are were considered to be the 5 faculties. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. And they're made up of earth, air, fire, and water. So the 4 elements goes into making the body. And then you have the thinking mind. And the thinking mind here is translated as the 6th consciousness, the discriminating consciousness, vijnana. So these are the 6 sense faculties, and both are saying here, composed of the 4 elements, and the 4 elements, being the elements, don't have any stable, permanent nature of their own. So this is how we're looking at this. Just as we observe in nature, the seasons come and go, winter, spring, summer, fall, planets and molecules and atoms are constantly changing and coming and going. There's nothing in them that has a permanent fixed thing to them. They're interchanging, interacting, interconnecting, interpenetrating. There's all different ways to describe this. So he's saying here in the earlier part of the text is saying, just like all things in nature, so too with this. This too is a composite putting together of and earth, air, fire, and water, but particularly eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and the mind. The sensory organs all. Basically, this is referring to the sensory modes of apprehension that we have. They're empty and without a nature, and here's the key line, but the false mind discerns them as existence. So this is the real question of if they are that way, okay? And we can see that in nature. We observe the seasons, right? And we see the passing seasons. We observe the change of phenomena, whether it's the land itself or the governments or the economy or whatever. Name a few things that you observe in the natural world that remain. I mean, just go to the ocean and just watch each wave come, go, come, go, come, go. None of those waves stay. And this is often used as a metaphor for lives, our lives. A wave comes, a crest, and goes, and another one comes and goes, and they just seem to be endlessly coming and going. So you can observe just by going to the ocean. You don't have to go to a monastery or a temple. You can just sit by the ocean shore and observe this constant change going on, and realize as they're doing that, you're breathing in, out. So as the waves go, your breath goes, your heartbeats go, you're in a rhythm of constant change and transformation without a fixed and settled thing there. Anyway, Robert Frost has a wonderful poem. I won't recite that tonight. Somehow, when fall comes, I think of Robert Frost, one of my favorite poets. So he does one where he talks about people using the ocean as a meditation. All along the shore, people stop and stare. Let's see. People turn their backs on the land and they stare at the sea all day. They cannot stare and look in far. They cannot look out deep, but when was that ever a bar to any watch they keep? And he's talking about this. People go to the ocean, but almost invariably they turn their backs to the land and just get mesmerized by this rhythm of the sea. Maybe not even articulating what it is, but they're getting a feel for the flux and flow of impermanence and wondering, where is it that I fit in this? You can do the same thing at night, not on a night like tonight, when there's no clouds. Just look up at the stars and wonder, where in all of this is there anything that's fixed and absolutely certain? Anyhow, so the question here is why it says the false mind discerns from existence, but again, why does the mind do that? It's sort of like human beings pride themselves on our ability to know and to perceive and to nail down things. I mean, our whole scientific methodology is based on that premise and that hope or purpose. And yet, when we observe, in everything that we can observe, there's nothing that's permanent and fixed. Somehow, the text says the false mind kicks in and resisted that, denies that. It's really a funny thing. So we like to think we're rational and reasonable, but in fact, we're quite irrational and unreasonable. What to make of that? So I will show you one of my favorites from Robert Frost. He was contemplating this theme. Now, he could have titled this poem Resistance, or he could have titled the poem Denial. But being the gentleman that he was, he used a much more softer phrase. He called it reluctance. Reluctance. And the poem ends this way. I won't do the whole poem, but here's the ending of the poem. He says, ah, that's how he lends the poem, ah. When to the heart of man was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things, to yield with the grace to reason, and bow and accept the end of a love or a season. No, it's just beautiful, concise language here, but he says, when to the heart, not to the head, to the heart of man, of humans, was it ever less than a betrayal, a treason? In other words, to actually go with the drift of things, to accept the nature of the flow of things, that's a betrayal of a treason almost. He says treason is what you use to say you betrayed the state, but it's you're betraying the very nature of things, and you're betraying this impulse, your heart, that resists this. To go with the drift of things, and this line, to yield with a grace to reason. To yield with a grace to reason. And then the last one, and bow and accept the end. And just bow. Bowing is this letting go, and accept the end, he says, of a love or a season. I would add, possibly, I know he wouldn't be happy, but I would add, and bow and accept the end of a love, a life, or a season. But this is where modern poets are sensitive, and we are sensitive to this, and yet, what's that reluctance about? Where does that, and this is sort of where this is turning why I think there's questions here that are being raised. Why in the face of this do we find it so difficult to come to terms with that? And it is a difficulty. There's a wonderful text I told you about before, and if you have a chance to read it, this is Vasubandhu's, one of the great sages coming out of India at the time when Buddhism was flourishing. He wrote a Shastra. A Shastra is a commentary or an explication of the principles found in the sutras, but it's not a sutra itself. So there's divisions of the canon. You have the sutras, you have the Vinaya, which are the code or discipline of morals and ethics, either lay people or monastics, and the third basket is called the Shastra division. And so this is a Shastra division where it's not spoken by the Buddha, it's spoken by an awakened heir to that teaching. And this is Vasubandhu, and he wrote, and the text begins, and this is called A Door to Understanding the 100 Dharmas. And basically this text is to take the world that we know and experience, basically the entire physical body, like the sense organs, the faculties that are being described here, the mind as the second element, so the mind and the body, and then the entirety of the human experience, all phenomena. So basically taking the whole of the human experience as it encompasses and tries to understand reality, and it breaks it down into, it almost does like an anatomy of that, breaking it down to all the various phenomena and the ways the mind and the body and the work and the identity set up. It's really a very thorough and comprehensive text. And it deals with the physical, mental, emotional, and even the unconscious elements of how we frame and put together and experience reality. And so in one sense, it becomes a descriptive, incredibly rich, descriptive, precise, almost like like the periodic tables of elements kind of for the human experience. But it also comes prescriptive because it shows how to free oneself from these ways that it sets up. So it both shows the entanglement and the methodology for disentangling. But it opens with this line, as the world honored one has said, this is the opening of the text, all dharmas have no self. And then it says, what are all dharmas? And what is meant by having no self? And that's how this whole thing begins. And it just goes into those two questions. So my teacher in this passage made a sub-commentary kind of, he says, all ordinary people are attached to the existence of a self. Here I would put in phrase, to the imagined existence of a self. Those who manage not to become attached to self become attached to dharma. So you have in the Vasubandhu text, what is having no self, what are all dharmas? So the dharmas are the phenomenal aspects of reality, and the self is perceived to be apart from those and in some interaction with those. And Master was saying, and this is clear, you break this attachment to self, but you're still attached to dharmas. So the Buddha knew what was in the minds of living beings and wanted to break through their obstacles of afflictions and their obstacles of the known. Now these are two technical phrases. There's two impediments to seeing things really as they are. One is klesha. Klesha is greed, anger, stupidity, arrogance, pride, doubt, irritation, torpor, sloth. I mean, you go through it's right out of the great works of literature. It's what the human beings do. But these are very concrete, psycho-emotional, even intellectual flaws, character flaws or traits that keep us from seeing things as they really are. And yet, we operate by these all the time, and that's why we become entangled. We're operating out of greed, anger, and stupidity, even as we're aware that they're not productive. And it becomes a habitual pattern. So he's describing these are the two obstacles, the obstacles of affliction and the obstacles of the known, or what is known. And this is our, either it's a kind of presumed knowledge. You find both in Aristotle and Socrates and also in the Tao Te Ching, the person that knows they don't know really knows, and the person that thinks they know doesn't know. And so our knowing based on the self becomes actually an obstacle to knowing. And so this is called the obstacle of what is known. Our knowledge itself is like a paradigm we encase ourselves in, and therefore from that, we don't see things as they are anymore. So when it says that earlier passage of, but the false mind discerns them as existent, discerns them, this discerning, seeing things as we think they really are, becomes a body of knowledge to us. And as a body of knowledge to us, we then feel it's really concrete and real. And we perpetuate this and add to it. How does Alexander Pope starts his great essay? Know then thyself, presume not God to scan the proper study of mankind as man. He begins with this idea, don't presume to have divine knowledge. Just look at yourself really clearly, and that's the beginning of real knowledge, which is sort of where this text is going here, is to let's look at things as they really are. So then the text continues. It goes, if you're looking on, why then do some undergo suffering and some enjoy bliss? We're reading on. Why are some respectable and others unseemly? Why are some good within and others good without? Why do some receive little while others receive much, sometimes receiving a direct retribution, sometimes receiving a delayed retribution? Well, within the Dharma realm, there's actually no beauty or ugliness. So this line is very interesting, starting with the first, he goes right to suffering. After there's nothing, they're devoid of a self or anything, but, and this is very interesting, it's almost like since there's no self or anything pertaining to a self, then who undergoes the suffering? So this again, this is why the bodhisattvas are asking for clarification. And who experiences the happiness? So this is what is being asked by Majorshi of Jewel Leader Bodhisattva. Since there's actually no real self or anything belonging to a self, this is a good way of rendering this. I heard one of my teachers use this way of the wuwo suo or wusuo, that expression is, it's a correct seeing of things. And in other words, don't take it as a denial of something, but basically it means not seeing any dharmas as self, not seeing any phenomena as self-existing, permanent, unchanging, and not seeing self in any dharmas. So this is not seeing a self and what belongs to a self, not seeing any dharmas as self-existing, and not seeing self in any dharma. This really helps clarify what this is getting at. So this is, I am this is me or mine. Another way of, I am this, or this is me or mine. And sometimes we talk about that, we talk about my body and my mind. You know, as if, well, wait a minute, who do they belong to? If it's, you talk about my, so you're presuming a self that has something that belongs to the self, or it is the self. So my teacher's commentary at this point, really interesting on these last lines. It says, the entire time that living beings spend as living beings is due to their attachment to dharmas that they perceive exist. None of them can really understand how those dharmas are impermanent and without any self. Even, it's really funny, we made the statement, we know that, and yet it's just really weird. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. If you had somebody come from another planet, it was highly rational. I know, what's this Star Trek? What was, used to have Star Space Trek, this. Star what? Star Trek? Star Trek. Wasn't there some being on there was just cold, logical, reasonable, and? Spock. Spock. Okay, so suppose you have a Spock, you know, come and say, okay, so he can observe everything as it really is, and so now you're saying there's a self and what belongs to the self. Please help me understand that. And there's no way you can wrap your mind around it. So none of them can understand how those dharmas are impermanent without any self. Thus, we speak of suffering, emptiness, impermanence, and no self, but no one is able to fully comprehend the meaning. Therefore, people take the suffering of defilement as bliss, and although fame and profit are petty matters, almost everyone, nevertheless, confused by them and seeks them. Although birth and death are important affairs, hardly anyone prepares for them in advance. That being the case, how can we possibly understand this problem of birth and death? And then there's a saying, he quotes this line, though fame and profit are petty matters, almost everyone is fond of them. Though birth and death are serious affairs, hardly anyone is ready for them. Thus, he says, living beings are born and die, they die and reborn over and over again within this revolving wheel of the six destinies. And six destinies, anybody know six destinies, what they are? Again, a Buddhist description of the continuation of existence, not just in the human realm, but other realms of existence, hells, animals, ghosts, people, the human realm, Asuras and Devas. These are called the six destinies, Devas being the gods. You know, wait a minute, are the gods? Yeah, the gods don't come out so great in here. They're not the ultimate. And that is the meaning, he says, of Zhongsheng, living beings or sentient beings. The Chinese is Zhong, multitude, Sheng, born. A multitude of lives. Living beings are born as a result of the convergence of a multitude of conditions. Furthermore, each one is the culmination of myriad previous lives. So this is very, not only many conditions come together to make it, but previous lives go into the plaster, so to speak. It is because any single sentient being goes through many births that they are thus named Zhongsheng, multitude born. And it's just because sentient beings go through a multitude of births that they must undergo a multitude of deaths. However many births one has, one will have that many deaths. And so sentient beings may also be called multitude of deaths. Master Hua was really good at this, playing with the expressions. I don't know what that would be, zhong si. I don't know. Was anybody's Chinese? Zhong si, si being death, dying. Yeah, zhong sheng, zhong si. So this is funny because if you think about it, again, in the common way, where we falsely see things as they are not, when there's birth, we celebrate and go hooray. When there's death, we cry and weep. But from this point of view, really, where would you weigh in on this? Because it's just, yeah, anyhow, I don't want to go into, sorry if I'm going to spoil the birthday parties or the death grieving, but anyhow, where do we go here? This does not mean sentient beings dying en masse, thus creating a multitude of deaths, meaning a major tragedy. It refers to one individual element, individual beings, sentient beings having been born and reborn, having died again and again. It is not known how many deaths one has undergone within the revolving wheel of birth and death. Why is it that you've not been able to keep yourself from this revolving wheel of birth and death? It's only because you've not yet put an end to an over-emotional love and desire. This is the fueling of it, sometimes in Chinese called aigan, the root of this self-loving. You have not rid yourself of them, and so the wheel of birth and death continues to turn. Revolving in the wheel of birth and death is exactly like being lost in a dream. This is very interesting, then come back to the dream. So the dream thing comes up again and again in Buddhism. You see the idea of a awakened and unawakened, and the metaphor obviously is something we can relate to. When we're awake, we're cognizant, we're alert and attentive, and we think that we are then dealing with everything as it is. When we sleep, we recognize that it isn't real. Even though while we're asleep, it can seem very, very real. But when we wake up, we know it's not. Sometimes even in the dream, we know it's not. It depends on the different kinds of dreaming you do. But for most people, the dreaming seems as real or more real than their real life until they wake up from it. What the text in Master Hua is saying here, but the other dream that we take as real, we don't really wake up to it because we continually plug into it. So we are unawakened. We are sleeping and dreaming all the time. As the Chan expression says, born, drunk, and dying in a dream. That's the human turning, revolving. So he says there's a saying, a person, this is a verse, I don't have the Chinese, a person's life is like a dream. Having dreamed one dream, he or she dies. A person's life is just like being in a dream. In the dream, he or she is wealthy and esteemed, but waking up finds himself in the same poor village. I'm trying to think of the verse, the line, I remember during a Chan session, this is not the Chinese, but it was tofu. Tofu? Yeah, I suppose tofu, everybody know what tofu is? Okay, so that was sold on the streets. And the sellers would go, tofu, tofu, announcing, and then people would come out of their house and buy tofu. So the verse went, there were two sellers of tofu. One was called Zhang, and the other one was called Li. And so the verse went, Dofu Zhang and Dofu Li walk 1,000 miles in their dreams. But at the morning break of day, they're selling tofu just the same. So it's an expression of wherever you go in your dreams, whatever esteem and wondrous stuff you have, when you wake up, you're still subject to taxes, death, aging. So, and the master continues, in dreams, one may be a wealthy politician or a president. He may be a top scholar or even an emperor. But that only lasts for the duration of the dream. When he or she wakes up, they find themselves in the same poor village. When his dream is over, still a pauper with nothing. In his dream, the 7 gems appeared before him, gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and so forth. He had everything, but now, being awakened, he's still just an uneducated, lonely, solitary person. But we do not realize that what we perceive as our waking state is still just a dream. If we do not wake up from this dream, we will have dreamed another dream in vain. Our lives will have been useless. So again, to put a sort of period on this is, sometimes I like literature and poetry for a reason that it makes a closer attempt at cutting through the dreaminess of things. It's a little daring and bold. It steps outside the conventional having to make sense, strictly speaking, and actually then can make sense of things that are really sensible but don't often get spoken, almost like a child's directness. So that's why I was thinking of this line I quoted before from Shakespeare's The Tempest. And this is the closing line. "We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep." Now this is basically saying the same thing that Master Hua is saying. We are such stuff. The Elizabethan expression that dreams are made on means made of. We are stuff that dreams are made of. We are dreamers. We are the stuff of dreamers. And our little life is rounded with a sleep. Now this could mean that our life is just a continuous dream, and goes round and round in a dream, or rounded means ends in a sleep. Either way, you get at the point here of the imaginary, almost unreal, dreamy state that most of us live in. It's really hard to come to terms with this, but if you look really closely, you can see just how much human energy and exercise goes into the fabrication, the construction of expectations and wants and plans and fantasies and desires that very seldom actually turn out the way you wanted. I mean, we get a little aspect of it, and so there's both this dreaming intensity and then this frustration and disappointment. And yet, the very process of doing that just continues nonstop. We go to sleep kind of working what we got that day or whatnot, but we have these dreams, plans for what's going to come the next day. Maybe some come, maybe some don't. So this is almost like pathos. And yet, it is universally human, all over the world, all over cultures. People are doing this all the time as we speak. So then the question is, then why then do some undergo suffering and some enjoy bliss? Why are some respectable and unseemly? So now the text is going through, or worthy leader is going through, kind of like, since there's nothing there, no real suffering belong to self, still, some are this way and some are that way. Some have this and some have that. Some don't have this. How? Well, how come? Why is that? So this is very interesting. He says there's a universal thing. There's no self and nothing belongs to the self. That's a given. And yet we see these wide range of variations, distinctions between rich and poor. And he goes on, some are respectable. Some are unseemly. They are looked down upon. Some are good within, and others good without. That's a very interesting contrast. So you can be good without, but not good within, seemingly good without. Or you can be good within and nobody recognize you. That's possible. Why do some receive little while others receive much? This is a really big recurring question. And philosophers have thought about this and tried to tip the scale. Marx was concerned with this. Why is there a maldistribution of resources and wealth? How do we deal with poverty? How do we deal with the wealthy? Did they deserve it or did they rip it off? And should we tax them and so forth? This kind of tension has been going on from the beginning. I mean, of recorded and probably pre-recorded history is this envy, this greed, this seemingly unfairness. And then why do some have it and I don't? Which then leads to jealousy and competitiveness and so forth. Some receiving direct retribution. Now this is going into the notion of karma and its effects. Yingguo, seed and fruit. Now some receive a direct return on their actions of body, speech, and mind. Some receive it delayed. And the texts are very clear about this, that karma being both the intentional action, willful action of body, speech, and mind, then goes through a period of ripening called vipana, let's see what it's called, Vipana, and then a fruition that comes about. So these are the three stages. The act itself, the intentional act. So karma is not just action. It's an intentional act with a ripening and then a fruition. And so the ripening and fruition are the ones that can happen very quickly. It can ripen very quickly and have an immediate result, or phala is the fruit. So, or it can take a whole lifetime, or it can manifest in the next time, and the third one is in next lives. So in this life, the next life, or life's continuing. And that's the question here is like, well, it seems as if some people do something and there's immediate, they get busted, whatever you want to say. And other people, it seems like they got away with murder. And the question here is then, how do we explain this? What is this? And then he says, well, within the Dharma realm, there's actually is no beauty or ugliness. So this is an extremely rich section. Just to summarize again, on one hand, the text is going through a very, what I'd call Buddhist, but accurate description of the nature reality of emptiness, no self, and whatnot, and then raising a question, yet within that there seems to be a very wide distribution of results and abilities, talents, rewards, punishments, blessings, and so forth. And so the Bodhisattva is being asked, how come? What's driving this? And then if you look ahead to the text, where we're going to be going next time, it says, Jewel Leader Bodhisattva then answers. And what this is going to go into is a very rich description of the determining dynamic or the determining factor in human affairs, which is karma. So you could say from a Buddhist perspective, the primary determining factor in human affairs is not psychology, it's not economics, it's not class, it's not social station, it's not education, it's not even chance or fortuitousness, it's karma. So this is getting right into the heart of these teachings. On one hand, there's an impartial, they might call it a law, an impartial dynamic going on called cause and effect, causality, that is at the heart of all what's going on in human affairs and in the realms of existence. All are governed by this mechanism. And at the same time, there is a methodology for coming both to understand that and then take control of it. So this is really important, because if you just have it that it's determined by this impersonal, almost like law of gravity, if you want to use that parallel, then you would seem like throwing the towel. What's the point? But the text is pointing out that even though it seems as if it's very powerful like this, and it seems as if it's coming down on you, in fact, at the center is you creating, even the you, that creates this karma that then reifies into so forth. And by understanding this, you can actually change your destiny. You can change these outcomes. There's a certain patience that's indicated here, because if you say, oh, I changed my mind today, I want heaven tomorrow. It's not quite like that, because it says sometimes it's more immediate, sometimes it's delayed. And this is where a certain amount of faith comes in. If you have some faith in these teachings, in these descriptions of these truths as they're presented, and you're patient to persist in the practices that get a handle on this, they will deliver the results. But there's an incredible amount of patience required, because some of the things that we have done create such waves, such reverberations, that for that water to settle, it takes a long time. It takes a long time. So this is what he's going into next. It's Jewel Leader Bodhisattva then answers and goes into nature karma. The thing that I also wanted to get to is a very interesting question why then do the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas engage in this? That was the second part of the puzzle, if it's that way. And this gets into the idea of nirvana. In other words, as you know, the Four Truths, there is this condition of suffering and so on and so forth, and there's a way to get out of that. But without a way to get out of it, then it becomes a really doom and gloom teaching philosophy. Oh, I wanted to share something with you tonight. Two things. I think we have time. See if I can find it. This was very useful to me when I was thinking through some of this, and I'll just read it to you and share it with you and see if you find it. This is from a Buddhist scholar that I've come to respect. Name is Richard Gombrich. He primarily studies Pali text and Pali materials, but he wrote a book that's very interesting. Some of you know when you read early books on Buddhism, you want to know about Buddhism, so people always say, what book should I read? And it's really hard to say, well, just read the Avatamsaka. It's like, oh yeah, that'll get me started. No, so there's secondary sources out there. There's a couple I could recommend, but he wrote one that's very interesting. His teacher was Rahula Walpola, the Buddhist monk, who wrote the famous What the Buddha Taught. And it's a primer, Introduction to Buddhist Thought. He wrote What the Buddha Thought. And this is taken from What the Buddha Thought. And what he's trying to do is to translate and decode, is the word he uses, these complex teachings to something more accessible and manageable. Because he said, even in the Buddhist time, when they hear no self, they didn't get it. So don't feel like, oh, okay, it's only modern people that don't get this. It's always been. So he says, a salient doctrine of Buddhism, I'll just read it slowly, its most distinctive feature was held to be the doctrine of no self, or no soul. But these two-word English phrases translate Sanskrit anatman, or Pali anatta. When Buddhism was discovered by the West, mainly in the 19th century, it was being expounded by and to Christians who were no less struck by Buddhism's denial of a supreme creator God, but for modern scholars too, the denial of a self or soul has been the most striking characteristic of Buddhist teaching ascribed to the Buddha. It will be easiest to grasp my argument if I come straight to the point and say boldly that all the fuss and misunderstanding can be avoided if one inserts the one word, unchanging. So that the two-word English phrase becomes not no self, no unchanging self, and no unchanging soul. I shall explore the matter in detail later, but here suffice to say that the Buddha's audience, by definition, the word Atman or Atta, referred to something unchanging. And in that linguistic environment, to add the word unchanging would have been redundant. Thus, there are several ways of expressing this doctrine clearly and accurately in English. One can say, for example, and he goes on, there is nothing in living beings that never changes. There's nothing in us that never changes. There's no unchanging essence in living beings. Since the main concern is with people, it may be helpful to just substitute human beings or people instead of living beings. So far, so good. If Buddhism is just a way to gain liberation, it seems enough to know that this applies to us as humans. In fact, however, the doctrine is far wider. It applies to everything within our normal experience. In this broader context, the word soul becomes inappropriate and one wants to use a word like essence. So the cardinal teaching becomes, nothing in the world has an unchanging essence. Or, there is nothing in our normal experience that never changes. And this becomes a beginning method for meditation. As one sits in meditation, people say, well, what do I do? You settle your body, you settle your breathing, but you can look into what is it that doesn't change? What is it that doesn't change? And you begin to examine everything, from your relationships to the cosmos, to the planet, to the seasons, to the micro functions of your body, to the aging process and whatnot. What in my experience is not changing? And very quickly you come to the conclusion that everything that I can know about changes. So that's all he's saying. What no self and nothing belongs to the self is just another statement. There's nothing in our normal experience that never changes. Nothing in the world has an unchanging essence to it. So this, he says, to go a step forward, then accords with what is known as the first noble truth. Now, if you go to the text we've been reading, and we go on to, I think, the next passage. Let me pull it up. Oh, just as we started tonight, he says, then why do some undergo suffering and some enjoy bliss? Remember that line that we just read? So then Gombrich goes back and he says, to go a step further in what we're talking about here, very interesting, there's no self, nothing belongs to self, but why do some undergo suffering? He says, to go a step further, this accords what is known as the first noble truth. Traditionally, this is expressed by the Pali word dukkha. Sanskrit also, dukkha, just spelled a little differently. This truth is expressed as a single word, not a sentence, and thus looks more like an exclamation than a proposition. Again, there's been a lot of argument over how to translate the word dukkha. And again, the choice of translation must depend heavily on the context. But, and this is his last line, what is being expressed is that life, as we normally experience it, is unsatisfactory. That's all it's saying. Now you see the clear thing here, it's not saying life sucks. He said, the Buddhist doesn't say life sucks. Life as we normally experience it is unsatisfactory. Well then, what would be an alternative? If it's not experienced normally, but experienced in an awakened state. And so my teacher once used an expression, life, to the unawakened, life is suffering. To the awakened, it is not. This is a different statement saying about life is that, and it's suffering. It's saying our relationship and interpretation and fabrication, construction of a life is what is at issue, not life itself. So never making a statement that life itself, because life itself has no nature of its own. You see, that's the openness of this. So anyhow, I hope you found that useful, because for me, it was a much more accessible way of doing it, I thought. Anyhow, one more thing before we close. I am discovering very quickly that nobody does history anymore. That was I had two majors in university. One was history and the other was philosophy. And I'm finding more and more I can't talk to anybody about either of them. Anyhow, there'll be a Thanksgiving gathering coming up, and I'm sure there's not going to be an opportunity to talk about history or philosophy. We'll be talking about how 3 frogs have 6 eyes and who's going to win the Super Bowl. So, anyhow, I want to throw a little history in now and again, okay? So please bear with me. But one way to have fun doing history is to take a day, like today, and then do a little research and say, in this day in history, something happened, okay? So I'll start with the obvious. This day, November 22nd, right? Anybody know what happened within my lifetime, perhaps not yours? Big day, 1963. The Dow? In Dallas, you mean? Yeah, Kennedy was assassinated. So I was a sophomore in high school, and I can remember the class stopped, and the speaker came on and said, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, has been assassinated in Dallas. So those of you who weren't around in 1963 have a different feeling for that, for those who were. But I just bring this up to say, oh my gosh, so here's something that was within our span that happened and had a major transformative effect on the country. So then let's go back. Chance to do a little more. 1497, November 22nd. Ooh. That's before me, that's before you. Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese explorer, does what? goes around the Cape of Good Hope, the bottom of Africa. First voyage from Europe to reach India. And this is the first to link Europe and Asia by an ocean route. Now, nobody thinks about that. People are flying all over the place going to these places. But then, nobody else had done that before, connecting the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans through maritime. And so this was a milestone in exploration and navigation, and it marked the beginning of globalization. Before this, there wasn't this kind of contact. So on one hand, and what I'm trying to point to, sometimes historical consciousness is to be aware of the advances and retreats in a same event simultaneously, rather than to triumphantly explore, yay, or not. You kind of see the complexity of mixed karma, how one thing can be an advance and the other thing, the very same thing, can be retreat. So while it opens the possibility for global contact and exchange, it also opens up for exploitation. So it's both the dawning of this exchange and also the dawning of the age of imperialism. So colonialism and imperialism now are an open door once this ability to reach out occurs, and both are happening simultaneously. They're going after delectable desires of this, but basically the spices in cinnamon and all this sort of stuff. That was one of the first, but it was God, glory, and gold. Those were the three motivating things. So they get the delectable desires, but they also get the deadly diseases that are opened up to the world again. And so we're interesting, like that's a moment in history, and it's incredible, and yet at the same time. So then it helps you look at current events and ask, okay, so we have this AI revolution going on, hooray! But then is there simultaneously in those moments, right while we're happening, the other dark side of that? And I just heard an interview with an author who called basically the dark side of mining, looking at lithium and copper and so forth, and explaining, hey, we have cell phones, we have computers, and we now have electric cars. Yes, but the minerals and the elements and the mining and the exploitation of those resources is creating a problem that's equal to, if not greater than, one that came from petroleum-based car use. So it's like, again, this is this mixed karma that we have. So one last thing, and then I'll stop. I have to try to make it halfway interesting, because my nieces just roll their eyes if I say anything about history, if it's not their history, which is like the last 12 years or something. 1935, something called the China Clipper. It was an airplane. It took off from Alameda, California, and it carried 100,000 pieces of mail for the first trans-Pacific airplane mail flight. Up to then, mail went by steamers and boats, and now it went by plane. So, like now, 9 years later, we just have FaceTime. We just FaceTime. I want to talk to Heng Sure. I don't have to send even a mail by airplane. And sometimes I sit on my phone and I butt dial, and there he is. And so, on one hand, what do we gain from this? What's the gain? Communication is faster, more immediate. What do we lose? This is always kind of, you have to ask the double question. Anything we lose? Huh? Yeah. What we lose is something nobody would understand now. It's called slow time. We lose what's slow time? Slow time to me was my grandfather in the summer sitting under this elm tree in his chair, opening peanuts. His cane was at his side, feeding the squirrel, talking to neighbors. An hour later, he'd still be there, not listening to anything, not watching anything, just sort of there. And if I knew where to find him, I could find him. We could have a conversation or not. But he lived in slow time. So on one hand, he was sort of behind the curve. But in another way, he might have been ahead. So here I want to use another piece of poetry. This is, of course, from Wordsworth. And Wordsworth, on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution and the move from slow time to fast time. And sometimes this is what poets do. They awaken us to the other side that we don't see. We get kind of inebriated with the success of something, but poets have a way of just causing us to look at it a little different. He says, the world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste to our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. This is how this poem begins. The world is too much with us. We become too worldly, late and soon. Getting and spending. Whoa, I am getting and spending. Avoid the rush. Do the pre-Black Friday sale event. Now I'm going, what the? Black Friday was, what, after Thanksgiving? No, beat it. Go early. Beat the Black Friday. So Black Friday has now become Black November. And every day is, it's sort of like getting and spending, we lay waste to our powers. What he's saying is we do get things, but there's a power that we lose on our hearts and our beings. And little we see in nature that is ours. So, and he says we've given our hearts away a sordid boon, a sordid advantage. It's not a good advantage. So basically saying like our jobs, the congested way we live, all the financial obligations, it controls our lives to an unhealthy degree. We're always rushing from one thing to the next. We earn money one day just to spend it the next, but only to sell. We sell only to buy only to sell. Chinese is my, right? Buy, sell, my. It could be my, all the time. Never getting what we seek, never keeping what we have, never happy, and so forth. The result of this is that we destroyed a vital part of humanity that is discovered only in slow time. We've lost the ability to connect with and find tranquility and contentment just in being close to nature. Even today, to go out today with a good raincoat on, not, obviously when it was the deluge, and just sort of walk into the woods a little bit and hear the creeks running again and see what the birds and the animals are doing and just let that settle instead of just, locking oneself down with a Netflix video in the house and ignoring the rain. It's like, wow, what's going on with that? What's that about? Anyhow, so in exchange for material gain, what he's saying, we've given away our wholesome emotions, our wholesome feelings, and a kind of liveliness. And I think what Wordsworth was also saying, an unappreciated freedom, which is the freedom to be left alone. The freedom to be left alone. So I'm happy to see you all here tonight because in a sense, you pulled away from Black Friday and all of that, and you've kind of been left alone. Nobody's here yet getting in you. Whatever, you're not alone, of course, because the accumulated goes with us. But to have moments where you have the freedom to be left alone is the most valuable treasure. And I'm getting to appreciate it more and more as I get older. So anyhow, a little history this week shared with you. Any questions, comments? You usually have one. Are you thinking? Oh, okay.
I'm trying to think if I should save the question or...
I'm thinking, should I ask my question, is the question I have. I don't know how to answer that. How's that? Oh, yeah, you have to have a microphone to think.
I think you mentioned earlier that about the thinking mind, right? And that...
The what?
The thinking mind?
That's the translation.
Right, and that the thinking mind is false as well. I guess that opens up a lot of questions, which is, what is the relationship of that thinking mind to, is there a true mind or?
Yeah, they're different.
They're different.
Oh, they're very different. Buddhists have the true mind and we have the thinking mind. Never the twain shall meet. Not. Okay, it's one mind.
Yes.
It's a difference in function. This is very important to understand because people do this. They essentialize true mind as something out there and thinking mind is something here. But in fact, the texts are very clear, there's only one mind. All beings have this one mind. The Platform Sutra says, used properly, functioning properly, clearly, wisely, it's Buddha. Misfunctioning, functioning poorly, it's living being. They're not two different minds, they're just two different functions of the same mind. So that's why it says the thinking mind is an application of the mind to a false kind of thinking, projection of me and mine, and so on and so forth. The same mind, when not going down that road and not constructing along those lines, becomes the mind of wisdom. So in the text it says, ordinary consciousness and wisdom are of a single substance, but two different functions. When consciousness is turned and transformed, it becomes wisdom. When wisdom is messed with, it becomes consciousness. It collapses down into consciousness. So that's why they say like ice and water, it's the same substance, but in two different functions or forms. That really helps. Otherwise, it takes it apart from the here and now, and it makes it something external. So used wisely, this very mind is Buddha. Not used wisely, this very mind is just ordinary living beings, or worse. So all the realms of existence come from that one mind. Used one way, it becomes a god, a demon, a human being. Used another way, it becomes a sage, a Buddha, and bodhisattvas, but not two minds. Yeah, it's important. Okay, anything else? Any announcements? Amitabha's session is coming up soon in the winter. Okay. Oh, yeah, and since I have family coming, I have to be around for next Friday after Thanksgiving. It just dawned on me, I'm the eldest now. That's weird. Like, they want the eldest to sort of anchor the thing. I think, well, my mother, no, gosh, my sister, no, whoa, everybody's gone. And I'm like, isn't that pathetic? I'm the eldest in the group here. I guess I should carry a cane, mumble and stutter and fumble for my keys, talk about history. Well, they know if I had a chance, I would cut the turkey loose. So they set aside a vegetarian fare for me, tofu turkey or tofu, something like that. But yeah, anyhow, I both look forward to it and don't look forward to it simultaneously. Anyhow, that's what it is. So next Friday, no class, and then we'll pick up the week after. And our last class will be December 13th, because that's when we take the break for the semester. So, okay, avoid Black Friday whenever it comes. We'll do the transference in English. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the Triple Jewel.